21 years, 7,160 days, 172,000 hours in prison for a crime that she did not commit.
Wrongful convictions happen in our criminal justice system. I've studied Tyra Patterson's case, and I believe she's innocent and was wrongfully convicted. I'm Jim Petro, former Attorney General of Ohio, and I am Tyra Patterson.
More than 1/4 of prisoners exonerated by DNA evidence have been shown to have falsely confessed to crimes they did not commit. I should know, I am Yusef Salaam, one of the Central Park Five, and I am Tyra Patterson.
In 1994, I sat on the jury of the trial of Tyra Patterson.
I was one of 12 jurors who voted to convict her.
Had I known that she had called 911 that night to get help for the victims, I never would have voted to convict her.
I am Sharon Wilson.
I am Steve Guy.
And we are Tyra Patterson.
Tyra Patterson's 21-year incarceration is a miscarriage of justice and demands mercy. I urge Governor Kasich to order Tyra's release. My name is Brian Stevenson, and I'm the director of the Equal Justice Initiative. I am Tyra Patterson.
The clock keeps ticking. I'm Coleman Domingo, actor, director, and playwright. And I am Tyra Patterson.
On the night of September 20th, 1994, gunfire echoed through a quiet Dayton street. When the chaos subsided, 15-year-old Michelle Lai lay dying in the gutter, shot in the head during what police would later call a robbery gone wrong. Her sister screamed for help. One person answered, an 18-year-old girl named Tyra Patterson, who had heard the commotion from a nearby car, stepped out and called 911. That call should have made her a witness, a helper, maybe even a hero. Instead, it marked the beginning of a 23-year nightmare. Within days, Tyra was arrested and charged with murder. The prosecution had no forensic evidence tying her to the shooting. She didn't pull the trigger. She wasn't even present when the fatal shot was fired. But after hours of interrogation, Tyra gave a recorded statement, one that she didn't fully understand, one that would become the cornerstone of the case against her. A confession made not out of guilt, but confusion and fear. The trial was swift. Her court-appointed attorney didn't introduce her 911 call. Key witnesses changed their stories. Tyra, a high school dropout with no criminal record, was convicted of aggravated robbery, enough in Ohio to hold her accountable for a murder she didn't commit. But the truth didn't stay buried forever. Years later, the victim's own sister, who had testified against Tyra, came forward with a stunning admission. Tyra had tried to help. She wasn't part of the crime. Others began to echo what Tyra had always said. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. What followed was a groundswell. Lawyers, activists, artists, even celebrities joined the fight. Yet it took 23 years for the system to bend. This isn't just a story about a mistaken conviction. It's about a girl from Dayton who paid for a crime she didn't commit, about how the American justice system can twist a bystander into a criminal, and how one woman, after decades behind bars, stepped back into the world not with bitterness, but with purpose. To understand how a 911 call turned into a 23-year prison sentence, and how Tyra Patterson became one of the strongest voices for the wrongfully convicted, we have to go back to the very beginning. If you're drawn to stories of justice, betrayal, and the people who reach a point of no return, make sure to subscribe to No Way Out. This is where true crime meets truth. Real cases, real consequences, and the darkest corners of human decision. Tyra Patterson was born in Dayton, Ohio, into a world that seemed designed to work against her. Her childhood was marked by poverty, violence, and instability that would shape the trajectory of her young life in ways no child should have to endure. The Patterson family struggled daily. Tyra lived with her mother Jeannie and 3 brothers in apartments they could barely afford. Her father was an alcoholic who physically abused her mother before dying when Tyra was just 13 years old. The family often faced homelessness, moving from place to place without stability or security. At age 11, Tyra made a decision that would haunt her future. She dropped out of school in the 6th grade. The other children teased her relentlessly for being poor, for her torn clothes and empty lunchbox. The shame became unbearable. She couldn't read well and struggled with basic math. School felt like another place where she didn't belong. By 19, Tyra had worked just one job in her life, as a cashier at Wendy's. She quit after a few weeks because she couldn't make change for customers. The numbers confused her, and the embarrassment was too much to bear. She couldn't read well enough to understand the register instructions. Tyra spent most of her time in her mother's small apartment, smoking with friends and trying to forget the world outside. She had no real education, no job skills, and no clear path forward. Her world was limited to a few blocks in a rough part of Dayton, where opportunity was scarce and trouble was always close by. On the night of September 19, 1994, Tyra was doing what she usually did, hanging out in her mother's apartment with her best friend, Rebecca Stidham. Rebecca had lost her car keys somewhere in the building. Around midnight, the two young women left the apartment to search for the missing keys. It was a warm, late summer night in Dayton, and many young people were out on the streets. As Tyra and Rebecca searched around the apartment building, they encountered a group of 5 people they knew in passing from the neighborhood. The most dangerous person in this group was LaShawna Keeney, a volatile 21-year-old who owned a black .22 caliber pistol. Keeney was already in an agitated mood and showing off her weapon, talking big, and making threats like she was looking for trouble. She had a reputation in the neighborhood as someone you didn't cross, unpredictable, and willing to use violence to get what she wanted. With Keeney were her boyfriend Joseph Letts III, who often accompanied her during criminal activities, and 2 other young women, Kelly Johnson and Angela Thuman. Johnson was younger than Keeney, but already involved in various criminal activities. Aaron Moten, Johnson's boyfriend, was also present that night. The group had been drinking and were looking for something to do. When they suggested driving around to see what they could find, Tyra and Rebecca decided to join them. It seemed like it might be more interesting than continuing to search for car keys. The dynamics between these groups were complex. Some knew each other well, others were acquaintances, and some were strangers brought together by circumstance. These weren't organized criminal groups, but loose associations of young people from poor neighborhoods who sometimes engaged in criminal activity together. The group piled into Keeney's green Chevrolet Caprice. Tyra and Rebecca got in with some reluctance. They knew Keeney's reputation and weren't comfortable with her behavior, but they were young and bored. Neither had any idea they were getting into a car with someone planning to commit serious crimes. As they drove through Dayton's streets, Keeney continued to wave her gun around and make threatening statements. She seemed eager to find someone to intimidate or rob. The atmosphere in the car was tense, with Keeney's erratic behavior making everyone else uncomfortable. Around 2 a.m., they spotted another car parked in an alley near Smithville Road. The gray Chevrolet Chevette contained 5 young women who appeared to be taking a break from their own night of petty crime. Keeney saw an opportunity and ordered the driver to block the Chevette's exit from the alley. Holly Lai was driving the gray Chevrolet Chevette, containing her sister Michelle, the Brogan sisters, Candy and Amy, and their cousin Danielle Jones. They had been out roguing and were taking a break when LaShawna Keeney's green Caprice blocked their exit from the alley. Keeney emerged from her car armed with a black .22 caliber pistol. She was accompanied by Kelly Johnson and Angela Thuman, while Joseph Letts remained in or near the car. Tyra Patterson and Rebecca Stidham also got out but stayed further back from the confrontation. Holly Lai immediately felt danger. Keeney approached the Chevette with obvious criminal intent, demanding money and valuables from the 5 young women inside. According to Patterson's account, Holly Lai called out to her specifically, "Please make them stop. Please tell them we don't have anything." Patterson said she approached Keeney and told her to chill out, trying to de-escalate the situation. This was when Keeney brandished her gun more aggressively. The robbery attempt quickly escalated into violence. Johnson grabbed Candy Brogan's necklace, attempting to rip it from her neck. During the struggle, one of the women in the car struck Johnson in self-defense. This enraged Keeney, who had been looking for an excuse to use her weapon. Keeney put the gun to Holly Lay's temple while continuing to threaten the group. The situation had spun completely out of control, with an armed robber becoming increasingly agitated and violent. At this point, Tyra Patterson and Rebecca Stidham began walking away from the confrontation. They could see it was about to turn deadly and wanted no part of what was coming. But they were too late to prevent the tragedy. LaShawna Keeney pulled the trigger. Michelle Lai, who was sitting in the back seat of the Chevette, was shot in the head at point-blank range. The 15-year-old died instantly. Holly Lai began screaming and jumped out of the car, running door to door trying to find someone to call 911. In the chaos that followed the shooting, Candy Brogan's necklace fell to the ground. Tyra Patterson picked it up before fleeing the scene. This single action, picking up a piece of jewelry from the pavement, would become the foundation of a murder conviction that would cost her 23 years of her life. After hearing the gunshot that killed Michelle Lai, Tyra Patterson ran home to her mother's apartment and did something that should have proven her innocence. She called 911. This phone call, lasting just over a minute, would become the most important piece of evidence in her case, yet the jury that convicted her would never hear it. At 2:47 a.m., Patterson dialed 911 from her apartment. The recording captured a frightened 19-year-old trying to report what she had witnessed while protecting herself from potential retaliation. The conversation reveals someone genuinely trying to help, not someone attempting to cover up their own crimes. "Hello, and there's something going around here," Patterson told the 911 operator. "I don't know what it is, but I heard a gunshot." When asked for her name, Patterson gave a false name, Tiara, because she was scared and didn't want to be identified as being involved in whatever had happened. The operator asked for more details about the location and what Patterson had seen. She provided the intersection near her apartment and explained that she had heard gunshots but wasn't sure exactly what was happening. Her voice on the recording shows genuine fear and concern, not the calculated responses of someone trying to mislead police. On September 20th, 1994, several hours after Michelle Lay's murder, Dayton police brought Tyra Patterson in for questioning. What happened during that interrogation would determine the course of her life for the next 23 years. The techniques used by detectives that day represent everything wrong with how police extract confessions from vulnerable suspects. Patterson was 19 years old, barely literate, and had never been in serious trouble with the law. She was also scared, having witnessed a murder and knowing that she had picked up the victim's necklace from the ground. When detectives told her she was there to help with the investigation, she believed them. The interrogation lasted for hours, but only a portion was videotaped. This selective recording is a common police tactic that allows officers to use aggressive questioning techniques off camera while only preserving the suspect's eventual confession. What happened during the unrecorded hours would later be described as coercive and manipulative. During the off-camera portion, detectives told Patterson that she would be charged with murder if she didn't confess to participating in the robbery. They suggested that her only chance to avoid a life sentence was to admit her role and cooperate with the investigation. For someone with Patterson's limited understanding of the legal system, these threats were terrifying and effective. When the cameras finally started rolling, they captured a frightened young woman making statements that contradicted her actual role in the crime. Patterson confessed to ripping Candy Brogan's necklace directly from her neck, rather than picking it up from the ground as she had actually done. This false confession would become the primary evidence used to convict her. "I'm the one that took the necklace off the girl," Patterson said on the videotaped portion of her confession. But this statement came after hours of off-camera pressure from detectives, who had convinced her that this admission was her only path to avoiding a murder charge. Patterson was eventually charged with 1 count of aggravated murder and 5 counts of aggravated robbery under Ohio's felony murder statute. This harsh law allows prosecutors to charge anyone involved in a crime that results in death with murder, even if they never intended violence or pulled the trigger. The prosecution argued that Patterson was an active participant in the robbery that led to Michelle Lye's death. The state's case was remarkably thin, resting almost entirely on Patterson's videotaped confession, where she admitted to taking Candy Brogan's necklace. Prosecutors argued that this single act of theft made her legally responsible for everything that followed, including murder. They painted Patterson as a willing participant in a violent crime spree, despite having no physical evidence connecting her to the actual shooting. But the prosecution's case had enormous holes that competent defense attorneys should have exploited. The most glaring omission was Patterson's 911 call reporting the shooting. This crucial piece of evidence, which proved Patterson had tried to help rather than harm the victims, was sitting in police files but was never introduced at trial. The defense attorneys either never discovered it or inexplicably chose not to use it. Multiple witnesses who could have testified that Patterson tried to stop the violence were never called to testify. Rebecca Stidham, Patterson's best friend who was with her throughout the night, could have corroborated Patterson's version of events, but was never contacted by the defense team. Other witnesses who saw Patterson attempting to de-escalate the situation were ignored. Evidence that Patterson's confession was coerced through hours of unrecorded interrogation was never presented to the jury. The defense never challenged the circumstances of her confession, never investigated the police interrogation techniques used, and never brought in experts to explain how such tactics could produce false admissions of guilt. Patterson's defense team consisted of court-appointed attorneys Carl Goraleski and Glenn Dewar, who were overwhelmed and underprepared for a capital murder case. The 2 lawyers admitted years later that they had failed their client in fundamental ways. They didn't even know that Patterson was functionally illiterate, a crucial fact that made her vulnerable to police manipulation. Most damaging was their decision to advise Patterson not to testify on her own behalf. Their reasoning was shocking. They claimed she spoke too hood for a jury to relate to. This racist assumption robbed Patterson of her constitutional right to tell her side of the story and defend herself against the charges. The jury never heard Patterson explain her limited involvement in the events that led to Michelle Lye's death. Before we continue, if you're finding this story as shocking and heartbreaking as we did, take a second to subscribe to No Way Out. These are the stories that rarely make the headlines, but they deserve to be told. And we're here to tell them all. The defense strategy seemed to accept Patterson's guilt from the beginning and focus on minimizing her sentence rather than proving her innocence. This defeatist approach meant they never seriously investigated alternative theories of the case or challenged the prosecution's narrative. They acted more like sentencing advocates than defense attorneys. Most critically, the defense failed to educate the jury about false confessions. In 1995, there was less public awareness about how innocent people could be coerced into admitting guilt, but the scientific literature on false confessions already existed. A competent defense team should have brought in expert witnesses to explain how the interrogation tactics used against Patterson, isolation, threats, false promises, could produce unreliable statements from vulnerable suspects. The defense also failed to explain the specific vulnerabilities that made Patterson susceptible to giving a false confession. Her youth, lack of education, limited understanding of the legal system, and desperate desire to go home all made her an ideal target for coercive interrogation techniques. The jury never learned these crucial facts. Perhaps most inexcusably, the defense never informed the judge about the 911 call that proved Patterson had tried to help the victims. This wasn't just a tactical error. It was a fundamental failure to present available evidence that could have created reasonable doubt. The judge, jury, and even the victim's family were kept in the dark about evidence that contradicted the prosecution's theory of the case. The jury heard only the prosecution's version of events. They saw Patterson's confession video, heard testimony from prosecution witnesses, but never learned about the 911 call, the coercive interrogation tactics, or the evidence that Patterson had tried to prevent the violence. Based on this incomplete and misleading picture, they convicted her on all charges after deliberating for just a few hours. The sentencing phase revealed the true injustice of Patterson's situation. She received 43 years to life in prison, longer than LaShawna Keeney, the actual shooter, who had taken a plea deal for 30 years to life. This disparity was stunning. Patterson was punished more severely than the person who actually pulled the trigger because she had refused to accept a plea deal for a crime she didn't commit. The harsh sentence reflected Patterson's decision to maintain her innocence and go to trial rather than accept a plea bargain. In America's criminal justice system, exercising the constitutional right to a trial often results in harsher punishment than accepting guilt, even for innocent defendants. Patterson paid the ultimate price for believing that truth and justice would prevail. On December 8, 1995, 20-year-old Tyra Patterson entered the Ohio Reformatory for Women to begin serving a sentence of 43 years to life. Prison was a shock for someone who had lived such a sheltered life. Patterson had never been away from Dayton, never lived independently, and certainly never been confined in an institutional setting. The rules, the violence, and the dehumanizing nature of prison life were overwhelming for a young woman who was already struggling with basic life skills. But rather than being broken by the system, Patterson made a decision that would define her incarceration. She would use her time to educate herself and fight for her freedom. She started with the most basic skill, learning to read properly. At age 20, she was functioning at an elementary school level, but she was determined to change that. Patterson enrolled in every educational program available to inmates. She earned her GED, becoming one of the first in her family to achieve a high school equivalency. She didn't stop there. She completed a paralegal training program, became a certified GED tutor to help other inmates, and even earned a steam engineer's license that would allow her to work on industrial boilers. The young woman who had entered prison unable to read became known among inmates as the jailhouse lawyer for her ability to help others with their legal cases. She spent countless hours in the law library, researching appeals, writing motions, and trying to understand the system that had failed her so completely. Patterson also developed artistic talents that she never knew she had. She began painting and writing, using art as a way to process her experiences and maintain hope for the future. Her work caught the attention of advocates and would later become part of her public campaign for freedom. Throughout her incarceration, Patterson maintained her innocence. She refused multiple opportunities to accept responsibility for the crime in exchange for earlier parole consideration. Prison counselors and parole board members repeatedly told her that admitting guilt was necessary for rehabilitation, but Patterson wouldn't lie about her involvement in Michelle Lye's murder. This principled stance cost her years of additional imprisonment. Inmates who express remorse and accept responsibility are typically viewed more favorably by parole boards. Patterson's continued claims of innocence were seen as evidence that she hadn't been rehabilitated, despite her obvious personal growth and educational achievements. Patterson also used her time in prison to mentor younger inmates and eventually high school students through correspondence and video calls. She became a powerful advocate for education, telling young people that staying in school was the key to avoiding the mistakes that had led to her wrongful conviction. For 17 years after her conviction, Tyra Patterson fought the legal system alone, filing appeals and motions with the skills she had taught herself in the prison law library. Her case seemed hopeless. Another young black woman from a poor background serving time in America's vast prison system. Then in 2012, everything changed when David Singleton entered her life. Singleton was the executive director of the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, a Cincinnati-based organization that handled civil rights cases and criminal justice reform. He had been approached by an OJPC board member who suggested he look into Patterson's case. At the time, wrongful conviction cases weren't OJPC's primary focus, but something about Patterson's story convinced Singleton to investigate. When Singleton first met Patterson, he was struck by her intelligence, articulation, and absolute certainty about her innocence. Over 17 years in prison, she had never wavered in her claims of innocence despite repeated pressure to accept responsibility. Her case file revealed inconsistencies and problems that suggested a serious miscarriage of justice. The breakthrough came when Singleton discovered Patterson's 911 call in police files. This crucial evidence had never been presented at trial, despite its obvious relevance to her claim of innocence. The recording showed Patterson calling for help immediately after the shooting, behavior completely inconsistent with being an accomplice to murder. Singleton began building a comprehensive case for Patterson's innocence. He tracked down witnesses who had never testified at trial, including several who contradicted the prosecution's version of events. He found evidence that Patterson's confession had been coerced through interrogation techniques that are now recognized as unreliable. Most importantly, Singleton obtained sworn affidavits from Patterson's co-defendants stating that she was not involved in the robbery or murder. Kelly Johnson admitted that she had lied when she implicated Patterson and revealed that she was the one who actually took Candy Brogan's necklace. These statements directly contradicted the evidence used to convict Patterson. Singleton also commissioned polygraph examinations for Patterson and several witnesses. All 6 people tested passed when they stated that Patterson was not involved in the robbery or murder. The polygraph examiner stated that the probability of all 6 results being wrong was slim to none. The OJPC team filed multiple appeals and clemency petitions on Patterson's behalf. They organized a public campaign called I Am Tyra Patterson that attracted support from celebrities, politicians, and criminal justice advocates. Filmmaker Ken Burns, actress Alfre Woodard, and Mad Men creator Matthew Weiner all participated in videos supporting Patterson's release. But perhaps the most important advocate for Patterson's freedom was someone completely unexpected. Holly Lai Holbrook, the sister of the murder victim. After years of supporting Patterson's conviction, Holbrook began to have doubts about whether justice had been served. She started researching the case and came to believe that Patterson was innocent of her sister's murder. In April 2016, Holly Lai Holbrook did something that shocked everyone involved in her sister's murder case. She wrote a letter to Ohio Governor John Kasich, asking him to free the woman convicted of killing Michelle Lai. This extraordinary reversal came after years of soul-searching and investigation that convinced Holbrook that justice had not been served. Holbrook had been 18 years old when she watched her 15-year-old sister get shot in the head during a robbery in 1994. She was the prosecution's key witness at Tyra Patterson's trial, testifying about the events of that night and helping to secure Patterson's conviction. For more than 20 years, she believed the right person had been punished for Michelle's death. But as Patterson's case gained public attention through David Singleton's advocacy efforts, Holbrook began to learn details that had been hidden from her during the original trial. She discovered that Patterson had called 911 to report the shooting, evidence that had never been presented to the jury. She learned about the coercive interrogation tactics used to extract Patterson's confession. Most importantly, Holbrook began to question her own memories of that traumatic night. She realized that in the chaos and terror following her sister's murder, she might have been wrong about Patterson's level of involvement. The more she researched, the more convinced she became that Patterson was innocent. I no longer believe that Tyra participated in the robbery that led to Michelle's murder, Holbrook wrote in her letter to Governor Kasich. I believe it is wrong for Tyra to stay locked up. This statement from the victim's own sister carried enormous weight and became a turning point in Patterson's case. Holbrook's decision to support Patterson's release came at great personal cost. Her family was furious with her for seemingly betraying Michelle's memory. They accused her of being manipulated by Patterson's advocates and of abandoning her duty to see justice done for her murdered sister. For a long time, I didn't want to publicly support Tyra's release because I was fearful and anxious about how my family would respond, Holbrook explained in her letter. But I've decided that what's more important is that I tell the truth about how I feel. Holbrook's letter to the governor was just the beginning of her advocacy for Patterson. She began speaking publicly about the case, giving interviews to reporters, and appearing at rallies supporting Patterson's release. She became one of the most powerful voices in the campaign to free Patterson. On October 24, 2017, after 23 years in prison, Tyra Patterson finally got her chance to argue for freedom before the Ohio Parole Board. The hearing represented her last realistic hope for release, as all of her legal appeals had been exhausted. Everything she had worked for during more than 2 decades behind bars came down to this single proceeding. The hearing took place at the Northeast Pre-Release Center in Cleveland, where Patterson was being held. She was not present for the 75-minute proceeding, as is standard practice for Ohio parole hearings. Instead, her fate was argued by lawyers, advocates, and opponents while she waited anxiously in her cell. David Singleton and the legal team from the Ohio Justice and Policy Center presented a comprehensive case for Patterson's innocence. They introduced evidence that had never been heard at her original trial, including the 911 call that proved she had tried to help rather than participate in the crime. They presented affidavits from co-defendants, stating that Patterson was not involved in the robbery or murder. Singleton argued that Patterson had been transformed during her time in prison, earning her GED, completing paralegal training, and becoming a mentor to other inmates. He emphasized that she had job offers waiting for her and strong community support that would help her successfully reintegrate into society. The case for Patterson's release was strengthened by Holly Lai Holbrook's letter supporting her freedom. Having the victim's sister believe in Patterson's innocence was unprecedented and carried enormous emotional weight with the parole board members. Several of the original jurors submitted statements saying they would have voted differently if they had known about evidence that was withheld during the trial. This showed that even the people who convicted Patterson now had doubts about her guilt. Leon Didone, representing the Montgomery County Prosecutor's Office, argued that Patterson should remain in prison. He emphasized that she had been convicted after a fair trial and that the evidence against her was overwhelming. He argued that the politicians and celebrities supporting her release had not spoken to the victim's family and didn't understand the full facts of the case. Didone also pointed out that Patterson had never accepted responsibility for her role in Michelle Lai's death, suggesting that she hadn't been rehabilitated. This argument put Patterson in an impossible position. Admitting guilt might help her parole chances, but would require her to lie about her involvement in the crime. Some members of the Lai family opposed Patterson's release, arguing that she was trying to escape responsibility for her actions. Frank Lai, Michelle's father, had previously stated that granting clemency would send the wrong message to criminals. The 12-member parole board was split on Patterson's case. Some members were clearly moved by the evidence of her innocence and her personal transformation in prison. Others seemed resentful of the public pressure and celebrity attention her case had received. Board member Trace Thalheimer acknowledged that Patterson has blossomed in prison, but worried that the attention might eventually overwhelm her. After hours of deliberation, the board voted to grant Patterson parole by a narrow margin. The decision meant that Patterson would be released before Christmas 2017, ending her 23-year fight for freedom. But it also meant she would remain on parole supervision and would still be considered a convicted murderer in the eyes of the law. On December 25, 2017, Tyra Patterson walked out of the Northeast Pre-Release Center in Cleveland and tasted freedom for the first time in 23 years. At age 42, she was finally free to begin rebuilding a life that had been stolen from her when she was just 19 years old. David Singleton drove Patterson from Cleveland to Kettering, where her family waited anxiously for their first Christmas together in more than 2 decades. She wore a black Columbia jacket, ripped jeans, and tall boots, her long hair perfectly styled around her face as she cried and hugged her mother outside the family home. "The second I was released, I kissed the ground," Patterson later told reporters. "I didn't care if it was nasty, wet, snowy, muddy. I didn't care. I promised God, if I ever get out, I'm kissing the ground and giving thanks to you." The symbolic gesture represented the end of a nightmare that had consumed most of her adult life. The lessons from Patterson's experience are clear. Coercive interrogation tactics produce false confessions, inadequate defense representation fails vulnerable defendants, and prosecutorial misconduct can destroy innocent lives. Until these problems are addressed systematically, other Tyra Pattersons will suffer similar fates. Patterson continues her fight for complete exoneration while using her freedom to help others trapped in the same system that failed her. Her story reminds us that justice delayed is justice denied, and that the price of systemic failure is measured in human lives. If stories like Tyra's make you question everything you thought you knew about justice, don't just scroll past. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us here at No Way Out, where every case has a voice, and every voice deserves to be heard.
This letter is dated April 26, 2016. Dear Governor Kasich,
My name is Holly Leigh Holbrook. I am the sister of Michelle Leigh,
who was murdered on September 20th, 1994.
I'm writing to ask you to release Tyra and set her free.
I no longer believe that Tyra participated in the robbery that led to Michelle's murder.
Supporting Tyra has helped to free me from the pain.
I hope that you will release Tyra now, because the sooner you do so, the quicker I can begin to fully heal. Sincerely, Holly Holbrook.
How do you feel when you read your own letter?
I'm happy. I'm glad I wrote this, and I'm happy for Tyra. Hope to be happy for her soon if she gets out.
Up for herself. I want to be in the video.
I'm serious.
Holly is the driver of the Chevette the night that her sister Michelle got killed. In early March this year, she wanted to meet at Michelle's grave on Michelle's birthday. She told me something that only Tyra had told me, and I had not told anybody else this.
After everything had happened, everybody fled. This one girl, and it was Tyra Patterson, I know now. I pointed her out to the police when they got there. I said she didn't do anything.
Hello, this is Cynthia, and there's something going around here. I don't know what it is, but I heard a gunshot.
I didn't know she was the one that called 911.
Please hurry up because I think they got robbed.
You don't think things would happen to you. You see movies, you watch the news, and when it does, and the way it did, them shooting my sister in front of me, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever dealt with. At the time, though, everyone that was there was involved. That's the way we seen it. They all deserve to go to jail. They all deserve to get in trouble. It's the way that was played out to us with the detectives and the police, too.
And who else was there?
I was there. Becky was there. Joe, Mo, Nikki, white girl, and what's the other girl?
And the police made it easier for us because they told us that she stole my sister's necklace. That just made it all the easier just to, put her in jail too.
And from which girl in the back seat did you take that necklace?
The driver on the back.
So it's the passenger sitting behind the driver?
No.
I remember going into the room with Detective Lawson. He said it would be better to go down for a robbery than murder any day. I remember saying, I took the necklace.
Kelly Johnson grabbed the necklace off my sister. It wasn't Tyra Patterson, and I remember that.
Tyra and Shauna was like, can I ask y'all something? Do y'all got any money, anything?
I want Holly to know, I've always wanted her to know that I was the girl that she called out and screamed out to help her.
Tyra's a victim also. We're both victims. Her being set free would set me free, because I have been under all this bondage of hiding, but I am here to tell the truth and to tell the whole story, and I believe she deserves to be out of prison. I believe she deserved to be out of prison a long time ago.
I could begin
so
to
sweet.
do that, but really, you are doing awesome. I'm obviously acutely aware of this case, but how many other cases are there like theirs, where there's a miscarriage of justice going on, and the governor has the ability to hand out that justice?
What would I say to the governor? Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody deserves a second chance.
And I hope this case will reach his heart and move him to do what so many people are urging him to do and release Tyra Patterson.